So, welcome to another Architectural Democracy podcast. Here we are today virtually and not in our studio in Helsinki. Today is the 7th of May 2025. As usual, we are here with Mark Linder, and we have two guests all the way from the other side of the world, Hawaii, Kate and Jennifer. Hello, how are you?
Hello.
Wonderful. How are you? Hi.
Thank you for having us.
We usually, it's a Finnish thing. How's the weather?
Terrible. It's absolutely dreadful outside, as you cannot see behind me.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful today. Absolutely beautiful.
It's comfortable, probably 75 degrees, partially sunny, and it will be a lovely day.
Yep.
Almost the
It's
same
not-
as in Oulu, which is snowing
Yeah.
in May.
Oh,
Um, yeah, Kate, Jennifer, tell us a little bit about you both, and then we jump to the topic, which is very exciting. We're very keen to hear about it.
so I understand that I have to go first, according to Jen. I've been a planner for nearly 25 years. I started my career as a baby planner in the private sector and then moved on to the public sector working for municipalities and even spent some time in the nonprofit sector doing planning advocacy work and teaching planning. So my background is kind of diverse, but most of my work has been in long range planning and community engagement. And so I was working at Hawaii Community Foundation when the fire happened in Lahaina. And when that fire happened, I started working on the Maui Strong Fund. So anyone who is following the disaster, Maui Strong Fund was the place where a lot of support was going. And so we worked on administering that fund. And one day I went to the wrong meeting and ran into the managing director for the county. And he said, "Hey, we need a planning director. Can you come help?" And I said I would. When you're asked to do a big thing like that, it's really hard to say no. And I thought I could be helpful. And this is probably a good time to pitch to Jen because we were having conversations about how we could be helpful at this time. And we basically got asked to come back to these roles at the same time. So Jen, maybe share your story.
Absolutely. Thanks, Kate. Yeah, so I've been in the planning field for about 20 years now, and all of my career has been here in Maui County. I'm born and raised on Maui. Went away to the mainland for school, but made my way back home. And first half of my career was in the private sector with a small local planning firm. But I did a lot of work for Maui County with updating the comprehensive plan as a consultant. And then I made my way into the planning department long range division and worked on the general plan, Maui Island plan, and community plan updates. And then I spent a brief period of time in our parks department doing parks planning, and that was very refreshing. And then when the fire happened on August 8, 2023, I was with the Parks Department, and my office was at one of our county gyms, which became a shelter for fire survivors. So the first week of the fire, I spent caring for fire survivors at our gym. So was just instantly on the ground with folks, and it was very real. And then a few months later, like Kate said, we got tasked to become more involved, to become leaders in this process. And I took a position in our new Office of Recovery, focused on long-term recovery planning in Lahaina. And Kate and I have experience working together in the planning department. So, and we have very strong mutual respect for each other. So coming together, working on probably the most important project of our life, I wouldn't have wanted to do it with anyone else.
Presumably, I mean, must have been a much more chaotic beginning than anything you've ever experienced prior to that, right? What were the expectations you felt others had of you? So in other words, at that moment, what did they think a planner with your sort of both of your backgrounds? Well, what did you think that they expected of you?
Um, Definitely chaotic. I would say going into my role, it was described to me much more that I would be a support for others that were leading. And then it became very clear that there was some leadership needed in the planning realm, in the community planning realm. And Kate and I weren't tasked to lead the long-term recovery plan until it became clear that we needed to. So there wasn't exactly clear expectations of our role to begin with, but then we knew we had to step up together.
Can you make a short briefing for the people who are just coming into this talk? What is the long-term recovery plan? If you can shorten it as much as you can.
Absolutely. It's a guide for community government leaders, funders, everyone to see where do we want to go and how are we going to get there. It essentially is a compilation of 40 projects, short, medium, and long-term projects to address recovery in Lahaina, covering social services, covering infrastructure, housing, natural and cultural resources.
This was drafted immediately after the fire, or what's the timeline that happened there?
I wouldn't say immediately because one of the things that we had to do first was community engagement. We had to talk with the community. Jen and I had previously worked together on the West Maui Community Plan, which was adopted in 2022. So we had a lot of experience working in the community and new folks, and we started amassing resources and getting people moving as quickly as possible. So we took several months to get oriented with the community to understand what their needs were and apply those needs to the plan. So it took us, we launched community engagement. We started really assembling the community engagement that had already been done in January, and we finished in late June, early July, and then we were writing the plan as we were going along. So as we learned things, we built the plan, and it was finalized, and we don't say final because this plan is a living plan. It constantly is growing and changing, evolving as community needs grow and change and evolve. But the most recent version of the plan was finalized in December of last year. And so it took about a year for us to get it dialed in.
Okay, so
Let me stay with the
go on.
theme I was asking about before, which is so you sort of your story, you sort of stepped into the leadership role and in a way took the leadership role, right? That was vacant and something needed to be done, and you had the credentials to do it. But then you start to engage people who've never met a planner, right? I would imagine. How did they react to your authority, and how did that? Because there must have been other people, insurance companies and developers and vying for attention. How do you gain a convening authority, if you will, in an environment like that?
Well, authority is a fun word to put next to planner. I don't know if that made Jen chuckle, but it certainly made me chuckle.
Right.
But I will say that Jen and I had built a lot of trust with that community over the last several years because they weren't new to planning. They had engaged with us in the West Maui Community Plan, which was still super fresh. That plan had a really reasonable, outcome. People seemed mostly happy with it. At the end, there were a few people grumbling, but for the most part, we did a good job with that community. And so when we were put into these positions as co-leads of the community planning recovery support function or team, we just gathered the people that we were used to working with, and then that grew because there were new people that were involved that hadn't been as involved with the community plan. So we didn't really have to assert our authority. People wanted to talk about the future. They wanted to talk about how to rebuild. And we asked them two really simple questions. to get that information, which was what worked, what needs to go back to exactly the way it was, and what didn't, what do we need to fix, basically. And they
So-
respond to those questions.
I mean, I would just say that, like, just it's an interesting comment about like resilience. You know, you guys having the track record and the continuity, that's an important part of the resilience function, isn't it? You know, if you don't have that, but so that, like, what worked? Does that sort of get at the, if you will, the heritage question as well, all the cultural heritage, or is it simply practical? What went into what worked when people answered that question?
Yeah.
A lot of what we heard from people was what was special and what worked and what they wanted to bring back was the sense of community that they had, their neighbors, and that they knew folks, and that they were happy letting their kids play out in the street because they knew the auntie and uncle and so were going to watch their kids. It was really that sense of community. And then definitely connection to place, whether it was people's connection to the ocean, whether it was people's lineal connection to the heritage, whether it was just the connection to the water and the natural environment. So really, people, there are so many long-time generational families in Lahaina. While Lahaina is made up of such a mix of people, there really was a sense of community. So when people spoke about what worked, it was that sense of community. And also people spoke about, you know, I worked close to where I lived. Things were within close reach. So there really was a small town feel that people talked about working.
Well,
And did you? Yeah, go ahead, Pedro. Yeah.
Why was there a need for a plan? In terms, why not do the same as before?
We got that question from the inside, from the outside, weekly, again and again. And we really responded in two ways, that this is an opportunity and obligation to plan for the future, plan for resilience, to address challenges that the community has had. And also we just needed an orderly guide to get us there. There was so much going on, so many circles of efforts and conversations within government, outside of government, at all the levels of government, state, county, federal. The long-term recovery plan was able to be kind of this central focus where we could pull together these project ideas that were forming. It really became just this container of lots of the efforts that were already going on. And it allowed us to document it in a process, in a document. And we really knew that we weren't trying to achieve something perfect. The process was really important, and the product is something we work with and we will change and adapt, but it is something we can point back to, and we're finding ourselves doing that all the time now, whether it's looking for funding, whether it's developing projects within the different county or within the different departments of the county. It really is a useful document, and we're hearing that from multiple people.
But it sounds quite psychological.
Sorry.
Also.
Can I add one thing to that? I think it's really important because everything that Jen said was true, but also it was a unifying force for us too, because there's the state government and there's also the county government. We don't have cities here in Hawaii, but we've got state and county. And we had to work together, and it was a way for us to connect because the state had projects, the county had projects, and this plan is everyone's projects. It's all the same.
This is very important. This is what I was going to try and ask. It's going to be difficult today to not interrupt Mark because he's very attached to this. But
Yes.
I have to force my way in. I'm just curious to how did this come to be? Because the impression from the other side of the pond is that there was a lot of mismanagement in this let's call it disaster. And what you're showing here is like how proud are you, or how did this come to you that you managed to have this kind of very wise approach to this, like in terms of let's try this, just use this as an opportunity. Like how did this hooked up? This is what at the county level, state level, was it just a person pushing it further, or was it a group of people? Was it in the air?
Yeah, so I think it comes from instinct as planners. Like we want everyone to be in the same canoe paddling in the same direction. It is the way that we think. So for me, there was no other way. There was a moment at which the state implied that they wanted to do their own plan, and I wasn't down with that. So I reached out to my colleagues at the state and I said, let's do this together, because then we have one unified plan and we can go forward together. Let's do this together. And maybe I'm just really convincing, or maybe they just recognized that it was the best path forward, but we were able to pull them into this. And part of it was just a lot of communication. Part of it was making sure they felt seen and heard in the process, because, you know, the county has this responsibility. And just to address your earlier comment about kind of the dysfunction that can occur in disasters, right? I think for Jen and I, this is our first disaster. We've never done this before. And I would say that almost everyone we work with is in the same boat. They're brand new to this. We're learning as quickly as we can. And we're also experiencing trauma, because all of us, even though we didn't live in Lahaina, Lahaina is part of us. Jen and I spent, I don't know, thousands of hours, it feels like, in Lahaina and West Maui working on that community plan. And so for us, it was traumatic for us as well. And we had to lead this process. And we had to lead this process of people that were all experiencing trauma and not coming at us from, you know, when you do public engagement, people can be mad or people can be excited, but very rarely are you running into people who are just traumatized collectively. And you have to come at them with a completely different energy. You have to work with them in a different energy. So getting back to what you were saying about why we pulled it together, part of the reason we pulled it together is because we wanted one cohesive message. We didn't want to have extra things out there that the community had to understand. We just wanted to work together. We tried to tamp down other public engagement efforts that were happening at the same time and say, let's just let us all focus on this together. And that was very successful.
Well, yeah, it sounds like you're not excluding anyone. You're finding a way to, you know, engage and embrace and extend. Sound like Bill Gates. But it does come, I mean, obviously just listening to you both, you have the skills and the demeanor. One would say, if you weren't there, being who you are with that background and that trust and with your personal skills, it could have gone the other way, right? I mean, in other words, and so when you found challenge, what was that like? So in other words, even though you are running this coherent process, there are going to be, if you will, factions who have vociferous needs one way or another, who are in conflict. What was your process for recognizing that and managing that? And if you have any examples of that, competing needs.
Well, just maybe within county government, the challenges we had around bringing our recovery support function teams together. You know, we had folks that were on the ground working on infrastructure right from the beginning. So we had an infrastructure recovery team, we had a housing recovery team, social services, etc. We worked weekly with these leaders of these teams to come together and to try to make them really feel the value of going through this planning process and developing the long-term recovery plan together. And we definitely had folks that were skeptical and naysayers from the beginning. And we had to just calmly explain again and address their questions and concerns, and really figure out how to make this process valuable to what they were trying to do. We had folks saying, I just need to restore this water system. I just need to restore this, like we just build back the way we were. But then through their processes, they were seeing, oh, well, there was this issue with the water system. It's like, okay, well, that's an opportunity to improve. And I think we just did a lot of listening to what their concerns were. When we would start to feel that we were in a combative situation, we took the time to say, okay, what are they really, where are they coming from?
Right.
What is their concern? And that would be the same with the community too. To really actively and compassionately listen to folks and get out of our own head and our own, what we're trying to achieve, and be patient with people to see the benefit of this process.
How much
Yeah. I just want to.
Go.
Okay,
go ahead.
I just want to say, just to tack on to what she's saying, infinite patience and unconditional friendliness. Those were the things, Jen and I together outside of the eye, we're just like going, freaking out about certain things. But at the same time, anytime we were in front of the team, we were constantly just reassuring them, even if we had said the same thing 100 times, we just kept saying the same thing and twisting it a little bit so that maybe if we said it a slightly different way, they'd understand. But being patient and being kind and friendly, whether, like Jen said, whether it's the public or whether it's our own teammates, because no one, like I said, no one is coming from a place of grounded, optimism right now. They're coming from a place of trauma. And so you have to be patient, you have to be kind, you have to come at it with a trauma-informed lens.
Just a question on that communication aspect. How was the communication with engineers, for example, roads and... Okay, exactly. Okay, go on. That was different, right?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of our leaders in our recovery teams, they have other jobs. They're leading departments of hundreds of staff. And they're responsible for our roads, our bridges, our water systems, our wastewater systems, our drainage, our housing departments. They have a full-time job that is too much for a human to begin with. And then you put this disaster on top of it. And then not to mention whatever's going on in their private life. Like, we really came to this, I came to it because I was one of the very few people involved in this that recovery was my only job. I wasn't leading another department. I wasn't responsible for anything else. My recovery was my only job when I entered this. So I came to it with a lot of compassion that these directors are amazing and they're doing so much. And when they're coming at me with some strong energy, I can be compassionate to know that they have lots going on. And maybe I just need to give them a little space. But yeah, that planner engineer conversation, I absolutely know sometimes we speak different languages, and I look at it as they can teach me so much. There is so much in their field, their understanding, their reality that I can learn from and become a stronger planner, a more realistic planner, a more informed, holistic planner. So yeah, those conversations across disciplines, across experiences, I think really help to inform a stronger recovery for us.
Maybe talk a little bit, if you would, about some of the, if you will, mechanical aspects. Like, was your sort of process published publicly so people could see who you're going to meet with and when, that kind of thing? Did you have output from meetings? What was your vernacular of the thing to sort of consolidate what you'd heard and play that back? I mean, ultimately you have this fantastic document among other documents, but what did you do in the interim to consolidate what you heard? And
well, we had two parallel processes going on at the same time, where we were working with our recovery leaders. At the same time, we were doing a public engagement process. So we were listening to our recovery leaders, developing projects, and engaging the community. and not asking the community what projects, but out of their statements, we were getting support for the projects that the recovery leaders were doing. So in our public engagement process, we did one-on-one interviews. We went to, if there were existing community meetings going on, or there was some senior fairs that were going on, senior events, and we would go there and we had surveys, online surveys or paper surveys. And our more structured events were these workshops where Kate mentioned the 2 questions that we ask. What do you want to change and what do you want to stay the same? We did 5 workshops throughout the West Maui, throughout the Lahaina community in different neighborhoods, asking those questions. And we paralleled anything we did in person, we paralleled it with an opportunity online, with a virtual opportunity, because we knew that a lot of our community members had left the island, left the state, or just did not want to participate in person. For whatever reason, we provided the opportunity for people to participate virtually if that's what they needed or what they chose.
So
and we also provided a summary of our engagement. We provided a summary document of the engagement to really capture what we heard.
I think if I can speak to that summary document a little bit too, there's one other thing I want to add is that we could not have done what we did without FEMA community assistance. And that's why, you know, when we started our conversation earlier, we were talking about kind of some of the changes that are happening at the federal level. And we're very concerned about FEMA community assistance because this is a huge piece of what we were able to do. They helped us synthesize all the data. I mean, thousands and thousands of comments. We could not have done it the old-fashioned way, just reading everyone's stuff. We had to have some assistance with that, and FEMA helped heavily with that.
How does FEMA
also
assist? Just to clarify for Europeans.
Yeah. So FEMA, well, okay. So I don't know that we can speak to everything that FEMA does, but we can talk about the community assistance piece, which is they came in, and I describe it this way to anyone who asks. It's like they came in, they put their arm around our shoulder and said, I know this sucks. We've done it in other places. You're going to be okay. And here's how you're going to be okay. And so what they did was help us figure out what we needed to be in the long-term recovery plan. It helped us figure out how we would get that data, how it would be, what we needed to do legally, potentially to ensure we had access to different types of funding. They exposed us to all the different types of funding that might be available. But the biggest thing for us, it was just having them be a thought partner. And sometimes, bless their sweethearts, they would say things like, oh, you should consider doing da 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 da. And Jen and I would look at each other and go, no, we're not going to do it that way. And they were so humble. Like they would say, oh, okay, that's great, no problem. If they felt it was worth pushing on, they would push.
How often did you talk with them, and to whom?
Daily. Yeah.
Yeah. So they were here. They were staff on the ground. So they rotated out, but there were folks that were here for a duration. And this was our first experience working with FEMA. And, you know, they come with a lot of reputation. And I know there's many different arms, many different experiences, but our focus, our experience working with FEMA's community assistance team was amazing. Yeah. They were so supportive. Any resources we needed, they would figure out how to bring them to us. But for these neighborhood workshops that we did, we needed people to direct traffic. We needed people to set up the food table. We needed people to facilitate this conversation. We needed people to scribe on sheets. We needed people to help people sign in. They were there. They were, yep, we'll be there. We'll be there. And they would recruit other federal folks that were on island, whether it was EPA or USDA or whoever else was on island helping with the disaster. They would be happy to be there and put on a jacket and direct traffic to our event. So they were an immense support for us.
I don't think anybody understands.
They never led.
This operational side of this. This is fascinating to hear this story. It's one of those.
It's
Were
the
you
biggest,
expected?
sorry,
Yeah,
it's
go ahead.
just, let me just say this, it's the biggest community engagement effort I have ever done in my life. And I've been, like I said, been doing community engagement for like 25 years.
Give
Like
us
this
some
was
numbers. Give us some numbers in
believable.
terms of how many people did you reach, or how many people were affected, more or less. Let's talk this more or less.
So more than 4,000 participants over all of the events. So we had all kinds of different things going on, like Jen said, listed all of those different types. So more than 4,000, I think it's 4,300 comments or engagements, something like that. And hours and hours of engagement, because not just, so like Jen said, we had two phases of things. We had the online version and of things, and we had the in-person version. So we were collecting data in multiple different time zones and different spaces. And, you know, when I say 4,000 people, there were about 12,000 people displaced. So that's a ton. That's a good proportion of the people that you would expect. So we were pretty happy with those numbers. But that, you know, every person has multiple comments. Then we have multiple like thousands of comments to go through.
How did you manage the process of stabilizing the planning? How did you decide, okay, we are actually getting to the point where we can lock this in, and what was your process of building consensus that this is going to be it?
Well, we
Yeah.
definitely, go ahead, Kate.
Well, I was going to talk about the 4-hour meeting. Is that
Right.
where we're headed? Yeah. So what we did was we picked a deadline for ourselves. We said we want this done. We need to have it done before the end of the year. And then we set benchmarks. You know, as good planners do, we plan the work and we work the plan, right? So at one point, so Jen said we're collecting all this community engagement information. We're working with our partners across the other recovery support functions to gather their projects, and with the state to gather their projects. And then that all culminated with a 4-hour meeting with us and the state, all of the recovery support, as many as we could get the recovery support function leads from the county and the state in a room. And we just went through each project individually and said, okay, this is good. This is right. This project's right because we need it for recovery. This project's ready, meaning that it had you know, it had either had a long runway and we need to get started now, or it had it had already had funding. We knew where the funding was coming from. Right, ready, and what's the other one, Jen?
Required.
We needed it for recovery. So right means the community wanted it, needed it was required for recovery. And if a project passed those tests, we added it to the plan. If it didn't, we kind of pushed it off to the side. In some cases, that conversation resulted in us combining projects because we had all the right people in the room. So they were going, actually, this water project is really connected to our wastewater project over here. Maybe those two things should be combined together, right? So that dialogue, that just old-fashioned sitting in a room eating food and talking to each other is how we ended up kind of putting a pin in what the projects were and then moving.
And who ran that meeting?
Yeah.
Did you run that?
Jen and me.
And
we took turns.
Who were in the meeting usually?
Say that again.
Which people were in the meeting usually?
All kinds, all the different recovery support functions. So like Jen said, housing, infrastructure, cultural and natural resources, all of those different support functions were in the room, plus the folks from the state that matched those as much as we could get them.
City level or federal government level?
So the state of Hawaii
and state, yeah,
and the county, yeah.
Okay, and then how did you transmit your decisions to the public? Was it in chunks or was it iterative?
So we did an open house, and it was so exciting to see this culmination. We did an open house visual where we had big poster boards for each project and had them across the high school dining room. And people came in, I think we did 2 open houses, 3 to 4 hours. And this was really great because we had our subject matter experts there. We had, you know, folks from Public Works. We had folks from our water supply department and our wastewater department and our housing department and social services and emergency management and folks who are centered on cultural and natural resources, just to stand next to their board and represent the project that they would need to lead for the next 2 to 5 to 10 years. And they would stand there as a resource, and the community would walk around and read the board, ask questions, drill in. And it was really exciting to see such a mix of county staff, state staff, community members, and we had the online version as well, where folks could review all of the projects, provide their feedback. And we really asked folks some simple questions too. Do these projects meet your recovery goals? Like, as a whole, do you feel that these projects are going to get your community towards recovery? Or what's missing? What did we totally miss? And really the feedback we got was, this meets our needs. Very little was missing. And what we heard from folks was, okay, now let's do it. Let's just start working on it. Let's implement this plan.
Yeah. Were there equity issues that were sort of ran through the whole thing, where communities, subsections had felt hard done by and needed some kind of reconciliation, or, you know, other tensions like that you had to manage?
Yeah, so I'll take a crack at that and see if Jen has adds. But one of the things in our public engagement summary, so we did a public engagement summary after the first phase, and one of the reasons we did that was to, you know, acknowledge what we had done, because it was important to memorialize that, but also to acknowledge where we had failed. There's a section of the plan where we felt, where we acknowledge where we didn't reach all the people we had hoped to. I think the youth is a place where we could have done better, and we need to do better in the future, that we need to bring our youth, because oftentimes the people that show up to these things are people who have time to show up to these things, and younger people just don't. So a more aggressive outreach to the youth is really important. We also have a lot of populations from various countries that don't speak English. We did have interpreters at all of these meetings, but we probably could have done better in our advertising to those folks, and also meeting them where we are. A lot of what we talked about, what Jen talked about in our different ways of getting out to people, was about meeting people where they are. But for those groups that don't, where English is a second language, I don't think we did as well in those places. And we're still growing, right? We're still growing and changing, and acknowledging those things is the first step to fixing them. So we acknowledge them in this public engagement report, but now in these future phases, we need to act on that and fix those things.
Do you have some numbers on that in terms of percentage of the population that was involved? Like, that would be interesting, right? Like, for example, the age average, or look area, was it to the more rich area, the poor area?
Such an engineer, Pedro.
I am. It's my first master's. And you see, we are talking.
So we weren't interested in collecting that data. I mean, I'll be honest with you. Like, for us, it was what people were saying more than it was getting like, for certain, a broad cross section. But we did kind of try to pay attention to those things. So all we have is anecdotal data, really. And for the online survey, the other thing too is to keep in mind that having that identified data, so if for an online survey, for example, if you add these demographic pieces, sometimes that really turns people off. And so like, we wanted maximum participation and didn't care about that piece of it. It was just really important that we get as many people as possible.
It's a very contemporary point, the data protection and then lack of insight.
We know you have another meeting coming up, but maybe ask at the last moment here, what's your message to other planners that they should keep in mind about this role, this quite special role? It's kind of quasi-judicial in some ways, right? Because you're sitting in the middle of all these competing forces, and you know, it's not like any other role, right? To be a planner representing community. What advice do you give other planners who are at this sort of stage of their careers?
Definitely trust that your training and your knowledge and your experience as a planner really does serve well in post-disaster and recovery. I don't think I would have known that exactly without living through it. In my experience as a planner and working on long-range plans and working across departments and working in diverse communities, I mean, that was my experience. It was natural to be able to try to reach a lot of people, to work with engineers, to work across disciplines. That was just what we did, and that was absolutely what was needed to come to this recovery plan. So just really trusting in our knowledge and our experience. Oftentimes I felt overwhelmed and a little bit lost, but when Kate and I could just recenter ourselves, we knew, okay, even though we've never done this, even though we don't know exactly what to do, even though we don't know all of this recovery and disaster terminology, like we know how to support our community, and we know how to bring people together. We know how to dig into complex problems. So there was a lot of just trust within ourselves and within our team. Another thing was really giving ourselves the grace when we didn't have the energy or mental capacity to deal with something in a day or whatever it was, to really say, okay, I need to take a breather and give that grace to each other as well. That was really important, to recognize that we weren't superhuman, that we were doing a lot, and sometimes it was okay to tap out for a little bit.
What's the current stage of the... Sorry, Kate, please.
I would love to answer this question too, if can.
Of course.
I think it's important to recognize that for all planners that are in the midstream of their career or earlier in their career, this is going to happen to you. Mm-hmm. This is the nature of our society now, our life, the way that we have ignored climate change and allowed this to persist, right? These major disasters are likely going to happen to you sometime in your career. So you need to take time to get yourself ready. Trauma-informed engagement training is one of those big pieces, getting ready to meet your community where they need you to be. Also, just keep in mind that we need to beg, borrow, and steal ideas. There is absolutely no intellectual property when it comes to planning after a disaster. We share everything. With LA, we're sharing everything that we can. We were given a lot of good ideas from other communities, and so that's important. And just to echo what Jen said, take good care of yourself, because this is not a sprint, it's a marathon, and you have to be in shape for this entire thing. And if that means that you are exhausted and you need a day, you take that day. It's critical.
Very, very nice answer. Could you tell us what's the state of the situation currently?
We are in recovery. We're rebuilding. We've got 10 buildings, 10 new homes reconstructed, and there's about 300 or so in the pipeline, I want to say. So lots of things are moving really, really quickly when it comes to recovery in places where it makes sense. So in these upland places where they aren't affected by sea level rise. So we're focusing on the things that we can do and we can get done. Jen's team in the Office of Recovery is taking a much stronger role in managing these projects. And so I can leave it to her to talk about some of those projects.
Yeah, so as far as on the funding side, we have completed our action plan to receive money from the federal HUD, Housing and Urban Development, and our plan has been approved. So receiving the money from the federal government is very significant so that we can move forward with building our programs specifically around housing, economic development, and infrastructure. So we have some large projects that are starting to ramp up as far as an urban design project within Lahaina town to look at circulation and rebuilding the town. Also the cultural, the Lahaina Royal Complex focused around Moku'ula. So we have some movement on the projects in the long-term recovery plan that are moving forward in partnership with the Office of Recovery and various departments in the county that have the responsibility. And just to note super significantly that 100% of the debris is cleaned up, including concrete pylons that were in the ocean that supported buildings that overhung the ocean. So it is definitely, as Kate mentioned, homes are being built, permits are being sought. We're in recovery, so it's moving forward, but then also trying to balance it with doing it in that thoughtful way and where we can really integrate resiliency and take a thoughtful planning process, but also supporting the community and rebuilding and trying to come back to their home.
Well, you both are inspiring. I mean, I just want to say it's awesome to meet you because it's who you are as people and as professionals, and your the evident caring and commitment and your emotional abilities to comprehend and to engage is a unique thing. And I mean, the city is so, I know you don't have cities, but the Hawaii is so lucky to have you and you both. And it doesn't sound like this is letting up. It sounds like your vortex is still kind of moving along very
Can I
well.
pick up on
Well, thank you
this?
so much.
Let me just pick up
Yeah.
on this because this is so fundamental, I think, because I agree with what Mark said. But how do you think, and this will be the final thing before we let you go, unless you want to say something more, because this comes down as a personal level, right? Like your ability to communicate so well across platforms, your patience and well structured method has enabled this to go hopefully well as it seems. Do we require to have that as a method for others to replicate? Like, do we need to put in the method of planning, participatory planning, the quality of the people on the table?
Ooh, that's a big one. A big question. Yeah, I mean, I think compassion and the ability to communicate across multiple groups should be a fundamental skill for planners who are looking to engage in community engagement work. As you know, like not all engineers are created equal and they all have different skill sets. Some of them are great at communicating, some of them have podcasts, but others are not, right? And they shouldn't stay out, go into that lane. For planners who are maybe a little more extroverted, a little more friendly, that this might be a path for them and they should be allowed, I think, to specialize in things like community engagement. We need more community engagement professionals. We need people who are creative, people who are thinking about these problems from the perspective of the people who you're trying to serve, not just from the, what the map says or the code says or the policy says. You got to look at it from the perspective of the people that you're trying to serve.
Absolutely.
So,
I mean,
answers.
connecting with, just coming down to that we're all human and we're all flawed and we're all emotional and sensitive and sometimes we have brilliant ideas, and just really connecting with our fellow colleagues and our community members just on that human scale, and just letting go of trying to say the perfect thing and oftentimes listening rather than saying something was so important. I mean, through this, we really had the honor to hear many of the stories of our community members, of their personal experience of surviving that day. And that was a part of us really understanding the heaviness of the work we had ahead, that we were doing this in care of this community who endured so much. So yeah, I think that personal connection is so important.
Therapeutic, isn't it? I mean, in other
wonderful.
words, listening to the story is more than just hearing the story, right? That it's an unburdening, it's a transfer of anxiety, it's a social proof, if you will.
Yeah.
Very powerful, which is like, there's a comment, I mean, the social cohesiveness of the American culture is not as high as it is in other cultures, you would realize, right? And obviously what's happening now is further eroding social cohesiveness. But what you guys are doing is building up that sense of identity and connectivity and community, right? In a way that is incredibly valuable, even without a trauma. But a trauma, of course, is a huge forcing function. So, I mean, it's a sort of, you're filling a need that's growing. So that's another conversation, but it's very important.
Yeah,
Well, thank you so much.
we
We'll
need to.
give you back a transcript of this, and you can edit this. And if we find other interest here in Finland to talk to you guys, would you be open to yeah? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, Jen knows this about me. I love a microphone. So anytime you have something you want to talk to me about, I am down to talk. Just let me know.
Okay.
Great. So whenever we have a gap in our schedule, we know where to reach.
We know, but somewhere there's a good broadcast interview in this thing somewhere for sure. We'll check something out.
Kate and Jennifer.
Well, yeah, anytime you need a warm up, just reach out to Hawaii. We'll do our best.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Kate and
Lovely to meet
Jennifer,
you
thank you
both.
so much for today, and let's keep in contact.